What would you do if your own child, the boy you carried, fed, and shielded from storms, locked you out of his life on the very day he was supposed to let you in? Miriam didn't get an invitation to the wedding. Not a paper one. Not even a text. She found out from a neighbor who found out from a florist who had been asked to deliver 24 white peonies for the groom's family. The neighbor had smiled awkwardly as if relaying good news, but Miriam heard the truth woven between the petals her son didn't want her there. At first she thought it was a mistake. People miscommunicate. Venues lose lists. But then when she called, his phone sent her straight to voicemail. She called again. This time the ring cut short, replaced by the sterile finality of a block. You know that sound, that digital silence that feels like a slammed door in your face? It's not just rejection. It's erasure. Her hands shook, but she didn't cry. Not yet. She sat in her kitchen with its fading wallpaper, the afternoon sun slanting through blinds, and stared at the phone like it might offer an explanation. But explanations, she knew, don't come when you need them. They come later, when you've stopped asking for them. She remembered the last time she'd seen him late winter, just after the engagement. He'd come by with her, the fiancé, all polished charm and soft-voiced praise. The girl had complimented the china set in the cabinet, the way the sunlight made the living room warm. But when Miriam offered coffee, the girl had looked to her son before answering, as though permission came from him. And he had smiled, the kind of smile that pretends to be harmless while placing itself between you and the person you love. Miriam wasn't naive. She'd felt the distance growing long before the ring appeared. It wasn't about the fiancé, not entirely. It was about the life he was building, a life where her role was meant to shrink into polite phone calls and obligatory holiday visits. Still, a wedding was supposed to be a bridge, not a wall. She didn't ask herself why she wasn't wanted there. She asked herself why she'd allowed herself to believe she still had a place. That's the part that hurts the most, isn't it? Not the act itself, but the slow realization that the place you thought was yours was only ever rented. The morning of the wedding, Miriam woke early. The air was cool, the lights soft. She could picture the venue. She'd looked it up, though she'd never admit it. Whitewashed beams, rows of chairs under oak trees, the kind of flowers that drink up attention like water. Somewhere in that scene, her son would stand in a tailored suit, his arm around a woman who would take his last name and perhaps his loyalty. She made tea. She sat at her table, and then she pulled out her will. It wasn't dramatic. No slashing pen marks, no fury in the ink. Just a calm, methodical removal. His name, once written with pride, now cleanly lined through. The legal language was cold, but beneath it was something warmer, not revenge exactly. Restoration. She had been erased from his day. She would erase him from her legacy. You might think that's cruel, but think about this: inheritance isn't just money. It's trust. It's the passing of something you've guarded all your life into the hands you believe will protect it. If those hands shut the door in your face, what exactly are you preserving it for? By the time the ceremony began, Miriam was walking through her garden, scissors in hand, trimming the roses. She imagined the vows being exchanged, the applause, the kiss. She didn't feel rage. She felt distance, the kind that isn't bridged by apologies or flowers. Her neighbor texted her a photo of the couple radiant under the oak tree. She looked at it only long enough to note that her son's smile was the same one he'd worn the last time she saw him. The smile that could convince a stranger he was pure gold while quietly moving the people he no longer needed to the edges of the frame. Miriam deleted the photo. Some women in her place might have begged, might have written long letters about love and forgiveness, but Miriam understood something deeper, that chasing a closed door only teaches the one behind it to keep it locked. She went back inside, folded the will neatly, and placed it in the drawer where she kept her most important papers. The act wasn't loud, but it was final. Sometimes the most powerful statement isn't what you say, it's what you no longer offer. The day after the wedding, the neighborhood hummed with whispers. Miriam could feel them when she stepped outside to water the hydrangeas, that mix of curiosity and pity people wear like perfume when they think you've been wronged in a way they wouldn't tolerate yet can't look away from. Mrs. Callahan from across the street called out a soft, "I saw pictures, lovely weather for it," as though commenting on the sky was safer than acknowledging the gaping wound under the words. Miriam just nodded, her hand steady on the watering can. She'd learned a long time ago that not all wounds bleed where others can see. Inside the house felt different. Not empty, no emptiness carries the possibility of being filled. This was absence. A subtle reordering, like a room where a familiar chair has been removed and your body still reaches for it before realizing it's gone. She walked through each space, touching the back of the sofa, the corner of the dining table, her fingertips skimming the cool porcelain of the china cabinet. You ever notice how silence changes after someone has made it clear you are no longer part of their picture? It doesn't just sit in the room. It becomes a mirror forcing you to see everything you missed, every warning sign you politely ignored. Her mind returned to last winter. The engagement dinner at that overpriced restaurant her son had chosen, the kind where the plates are more about presentation than sustenance. She'd dressed in her best navy blouse, the one that made her feel dignified but not flashy. The fiancé had worn white, not cream, not ivory, but the kind of blinding white that demands the spotlight. Over dessert, Miriam had tried to tell a small, harmless story about her son as a boy, how he'd once refused to take off a raincoat for 3 days because he was convinced it made him invincible. The table laughed except for the bride-to-be, whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes. Her son had placed his hand over the woman's and said, "Mom exaggerates sometimes." It was small, almost nothing. But Miriam had felt the sting of being publicly edited, her truth sanded down to fit someone else's narrative. That was the night she realized she was no longer a storyteller in his life. She was an anecdote to be managed. In the present, she stood at the kitchen counter, the will spread out before her again. She wasn't rethinking it. She was refining it. Her pen moved with deliberate precision, ensuring the language left no room for ambiguity. Her estate would go to her niece, a quiet, dependable girl who had never once treated Miriam's time or presence as optional. There's a strange kind of peace in making a choice without anger. When you're not driven by rage, your decisions stand like stone, immovable, weatherproof. That evening, the phone rang. An unfamiliar number again. This time, she let it go to voicemail. Later, she pressed play. It was her son's voice, careful and measured, as if he were navigating an unfamiliar road. "Hi, Mom. I know you probably heard about the wedding. Things got complicated. I hope you're okay. We'll talk soon." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "I wish you'd been there." Just the vague promise of soon, the kind that stretches into never if you let it. You know, the kind of apology that's really a placeholder, don't you? A bridge made of paper looks like a way across, but one step and you're falling through. She didn't call back. Instead, she slipped on a sweater and went out into the garden. The air was cool, scented with damp earth. Above her, the moon hung low, not quite full, its light soft enough to keep secrets. She thought about how he might react when he found out not about the missed call, but about the will. Would he see it as cruelty, as revenge, or would he never even know because by the time it mattered, their lives would have diverged so far that the paper in her drawer would be nothing more than an afterthought in a lawyer's office? Miriam didn't mind either way. The choice wasn't for him to understand. She sat on the garden bench, her knees wrapped in the glow of the porch light. Somewhere in the night, a train's distant horn drifted through the stillness. It reminded her of leaving home at 18, suitcase in hand, a mother's voice calling after her with warnings about the cost of being too soft. That voice, long gone now, had been right. Softness given to the wrong hands isn't kindness. It's currency. And once spent, you don't get it back. The garden was quiet. The will was finished. And Miriam, for the first time in years, felt the unshakable steadiness of someone who owed nothing to anyone who would lock her out and still expect her to leave the door open. 2 days later, Miriam took the bus downtown with a manila folder pressed flat against her ribs, the way you carry something that used to be fragile and suddenly is not. The legal office smelled like paper and lemon polish. She sat in a chair that tried to soften her back and failed, and listened to the attorney read through the revisions she had already memorized. There were no theatrics, no raised eyebrows, just acknowledgments, initial signatures. The sound of the pen across the page was steady, almost musical. She imagined a metronome marking the tempo of her detachment. You would think an act like this should feel like a cliff. It did not. It felt like a staircase you had already climbed in your mind, and today your feet simply caught up. On her way home, she stopped at the bank to check the safe deposit box. Inside lay the family pieces everyone always assumed would pass to her son. The antique key necklace from her grandmother, the watch her husband had worn every day until his last, the metal warmed by years of pulse, the silver locket with the faded photograph of 2 children who had outgrown the frame. Miriam took out the locket, wiped its face with the corner of her sleeve, then set it back. She was not erasing the past. She was refusing to mortgage it to a future that had no room for her. Back at the house, a small package waited at the door. No return address. Inside tissue paper and a card embossed with the name of a resort where her son and his bride were honeymooning. The card read, "Thank you for understanding. You will hear from us when we are settled." No signature, not even a name. He had been taught to treat people like recipients of announcements. It used to be softer, a boy asking permission. Now it was a man granting updates like favors. You know that tone, the kind that frames your exclusion as a gift you should feel grateful to receive. If you push back, you are ungracious. If you accept it, you become furniture. She put the card in the drawer with the stray rubber bands and never-used coupons. Then she boiled water for tea. The kettle sang. On the counter, a single teacup, weighted porcelain thin rims spidered with a crack that had never quite traveled. She thought of patching it once. She had decided to keep drinking from it instead, a reminder that not every fracture demands replacement. Her phone buzzed. A message from a number labeled Groomer in her old phone book, a nickname from childhood that made her smile in spite of herself. It was her sister Ruth. Saw the photos. Did he at least call you after? Miriam typed he left a voicemail. It was careful. Ruth replied, careful is not the same as kind. In the quiet that followed, Miriam walked to the hallway where framed photos climbed the wall in uneven steps. She paused at one of her son at 8, hair sticking up in defiance, holding a cardboard crown from a school play. He had insisted on practicing his lines in the living room for hours, mispronouncing kingdom as kind of dumb and bursting into laughter at his own mistake. She had laughed too. Later she had made him rehearse again, slower, clearer, teaching him that the world listens better when you respect the words in your mouth. Do you ever wonder which lesson is the one that teaches them how to leave you? Discipline shapes ambition. Ambition sometimes forgets its teacher. That evening, the neighbor girl who fed cats when people traveled knocked gently. She held a pie in a foil pan, cheeks red from the cold. For you, Ms. Miriam, she said. My mother says you must have sweet food this week. It rewires the weak. Miriam thanked her and cut 2 slices. They ate in the kitchen under the warm, light steam rising from their tea. The girl talked about school and the way the chemistry teacher laughed, and Miriam listened like a parched leaf listens to rain. When the girl left, the house felt less like absence and more like room. Later, a new message arrived from her son. It came as a single sentence. I wish things had been different. The words were lined up like soldiers, sturdy and useless. She could hear the unsaid parts. He wished she had been easier. He wished his bride had not bristled. He wished the story did not require him to choose. He wished to be innocent without doing the labor of mending. Miriam typed nothing. She folded laundry. She blew out the candle on the mantel and watched the smoke spin into a thin ribbon before it faded. In the dark glass of the window, she caught her reflection beside the silhouette of the china cabinet. For a heartbeat, she saw 2 women layered there. The quiet mother who waits by the door with a plate of cut fruit. The woman who shuts the drawer on the will and sleeps well. The next morning she went through boxes in the attic. Not to purge, to curate. She found his kindergarten drawings, a sun with extra rays, a house with a crooked chimney, a stick figure woman holding a heart larger than her body. She set those aside for her niece, who would honor the stories without rewriting them. She found letters from summers at camp scribbled with demands for batteries and candy signed, Love You Save Me, like she was both home and rescue boat. She read them, smiled, then tied them with ribbon and placed them in a separate box labeled Archive Not Shrine. At the bottom of one box, she discovered a small envelope addressed in her own neat hand. It had never been mailed. Years ago, she had written to herself in a moment of fear. It said, if he loves you less when you ask for respect, it is not love thinning. It is illusion washing off. She slipped the note into her pocket and felt its weight settle like a compass. Around midday, Ruth arrived with soup in glass jars and a look that said she would stay as long as she was needed. They sat at the dining table that had hosted birthdays, flu seasons, report card celebrations, and one remarkable victory when her son had finally said sorry without being told to. Ruth brought up the hard topic gently. What if he comes around? Then he will arrive at a door that is closed but not locked, Miriam said. He will have to knock. He will have to use his own hands. You have felt it too, that shift from waiting to letting others do the walking. It is not spite. It is balance. If you always cross the distance, they never learn what crossing costs. That night, Miriam wrote a letter she did not plan to send, not to her son, to herself. She wrote down what she would require for re-entry. Not flowers, not a photo op. An apology that names the act a promise that binds the tongue before it edits her story, a seat for her that is not in the shadows. She folded the paper and placed it under the cracked teacup like a secret key slid beneath a mat only she knows exists. Outside, rain began tapping the gutters with small clinician fingers. The house listened. Inside, the negative space that used to ache turned into a corridor of air where her lungs expanded. She slept with the window a finger-width open to let the night prove itself harmless. Weeks passed and winter softened into the kind of early spring that still carried a chill in its bones. The garden began to stir buds on the rose bushes, shy green shoots pushing through last year's leaves. Miriam spent her mornings outside pruning her gloves damp with earth. She had stopped expecting calls. Expectations, she realized, were just invitations for disappointment to arrive on schedule. One morning she found an envelope wedged between the slats of her front gate. No stamp, no postmark, hand-delivered. The handwriting was his, but changed somehow, more careful, almost formal, as if written with the knowledge it might be kept as evidence. Inside was a single sheet. "I've been thinking about that day, about what I did. I thought I was protecting peace, but I see now I was just protecting myself. I hurt you. I'm sorry." It wasn't the kind of apology you imagine in Long Nights, those cinematic scenes where someone arrives breathless, ready to rebuild from the ground up. But it was sharper than the vague soon he'd offered before. It named the wound. That mattered. Still, Miriam didn't rush to respond. You learn after years of being the first to reach out that timing is its own language. Sometimes you need to let the other person sit with the echo of what they've sent, feel the shape of the silence you choose not to fill immediately. That afternoon, Ruth came by with a basket of fresh bread. They sat on the porch eating slices thick with butter. Miriam showed her the letter. Ruth read it twice, then set it down. "Do you believe him?" "I believe he believes himself in this moment," Miriam said. "The question is, will he still believe it when it costs him something? You've seen it, haven't you? The apologies that dissolve once the other person thinks you've softened, once they sense the balance tipping back in their favor. Real change costs. And people rarely pay the full price unless they feel the debt in their bones." 2 days later, another letter came, shorter. "We're back in town. I'd like to see you." Miriam stood at the kitchen counter with the note in her hand, the will still in the same drawer beneath her fingers. She thought of the garden gate, slightly ajar at dawn, of stepping through only when she chose. Meeting him could be that step, or it could be another trapdoor disguised as a welcome mat. When they finally met, it was in a quiet cafe 2 neighborhoods away. Neutral ground. She arrived first, choosing a seat by the window where morning light spilled in warm ribbons catching in the steam of her tea. He entered 5 minutes later, looking older, not in years, but in the way a man does when he's begun to suspect the armor he wears is paper-thin. He sat. For a moment neither spoke. "Then you look well." "I am well," Miriam said. No qualifiers, no pretending her well-being was tethered to his presence. He nodded, eyes down. "I made a mistake. I thought it would be simpler if—" "You thought removing me would be simpler than facing whatever conflict you imagined I might bring?" She set her tone even. His jaw worked. "It wasn't fair. To you." "No," she agreed, "it wasn't." There it was, the stillness in which truth doesn't need to be dressed or softened. He didn't try to fill it with excuses. That was new. "You don't owe me a place in your life," she said. "But I don't owe you one in mine either. Trust has to be built from both sides." He looked at her, then really looked as if the mother in front of him was not the same woman who used to wait up with a porch light on. "I'd like to try." "Trying is fine," she said, "as long as you understand that effort alone doesn't erase history." They talked for an hour, mostly about unthreatening things, the cafe's cinnamon rolls, the weather, a book she'd been reading. But beneath it all was the hum of something tentative and fragile, like a bridge still under construction. When they parted, he didn't ask to come by the house. She didn't offer. That, too, was deliberate. Back home, she stood at the dining table with the will before her. She didn't change it. Not yet. Love she knew could be extended without being underwritten. He would have to learn that her boundaries were not walls, but gates ones, that opened only when both sides respected the ground they stood on. That evening, she lit a single candle on the mantel. The flame flickered against the silver locket in the cabinet, the one that held the photograph of 2 children. She didn't take it out. She didn't need to. The past was intact, the future unwritten. And in between, Miriam sat in the quiet, steady, in the knowledge that the woman who knows her worth doesn't beg, she watches. Then she rises.